Marcus Cole was 38 years old, a logistics operations manager who had spent 12 years building something most people in his industry had stopped believing was possible: a freight routing company that actually ran on time. He drove a 6-year-old Jeep Cherokee. He wore a wedding ring. He woke every morning at 5:15 and spent 45 minutes before the house stirred reading contracts, tracking shipments, and working through whatever problem had surfaced overnight. Because problems in logistics do not wait for office hours. His wife, Diane, left him on a Tuesday in April for a man named Gregory Holt, commercial real estate developer, net worth publicly reported at $14 million, the kind of man who wore his money where people could see it. She left Marcus because she believed she was trading up. She had no idea that the company Marcus had been quietly building for 6 years, the one she had called his little project, the one she had asked him twice to consider winding down so he could take a more stable corporate position, was 18 months from a $400 million acquisition. She found out the same way the rest of the world did. By then, Gregory Holt had been bankrupt for 8 months. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was already cold when Marcus found the letter. It was 5:22 in the morning. He had let it sit while he worked through a carrier dispute in the Pacific Northwest, and by the time he reached for the mug, the morning had gone ahead without it. He picked up the envelope from the edge of his desk, his name on the front in Diane's handwriting. He had seen her handwriting 10,000 times. He opened it. She had written 3 pages. He read all of them. She had worked on them. They were not a rough draft. She said she had been unhappy for a long time, that she felt she had put her own ambitions on hold, that she deserved more than she had allowed herself to want. She said she had met someone who understood that about her. She said his name. She said she hoped Marcus would eventually understand that this was not about anything wrong with him. It was about who she needed to become. He set the letter down on his desk. He put it back in the envelope. He set the envelope under his keyboard. He picked up his cold coffee and drank it. Then he went back to the carrier dispute in the Pacific Northwest, because there was a $4 million shipment delayed at a hub in Portland, and the client had called twice already, and problems in logistics do not wait. He would figure out the rest later. He had always been better at sequencing than he was at stopping. 3 years before the letter, before Gregory Holt and the Tuesday in April, Marcus had been a man in the exact middle of building something. RootCore LLC had started as a software tool he had built on the side in 2016, a routing optimization system for mid-market freight carriers, the kind of companies too large for manual dispatch and too small to afford enterprise software. He had identified the gap after 12 years of watching it cost people money that nobody thought to add up. He had learned to code well enough to build the first version himself. He had tested it with 3 carriers, refined it across 2 years, and by 2019 had 22 clients and a team of 7. He had been running RootCore on 4 hours of sleep and the belief that if you solved a real problem correctly, the world would eventually come to that conclusion on its own schedule. Diane had seen the early version and called it interesting. By the 3rd year, she had started calling it a distraction. By the 5th, she had started having a separate conversation. The one about stability, about corporate positions, about the kind of life she had envisioned and the kind she was actually living. He had listened to each version of that conversation carefully. He had not changed direction. He had not been unkind about it. He had simply continued the way he continued everything, forward at the pace the problem required. He had noticed Gregory Holt in January, not the man himself, his name initially, in the margin of a conversation Diane was having on her phone that she minimized when Marcus walked into the room. Then, the name again, in February, in a text preview that appeared on the kitchen counter before the screen locked. Then, in March, a charge on the shared credit card to a restaurant Marcus had not been to on a Thursday evening he had spent at the office. He had not said anything. He had filed it away the way a man files away a system alert, not with panic, but with the attention of someone who understands that the first sign of a problem and the last moment to address it are usually not the same moment. The letter arrived in April. He was sorry she was unhappy. He was not, in the deepest part of his assessment, surprised. What he had not expected was what came after. Her name was Lorraine Whitfield. She was 64, retired from 30 years as an accountant at a mid-size audit firm in Cincinnati, precise, unhurried. With reading glasses she removed deliberately before making any important statement, as though she wanted nothing between her eyes and the person she was addressing. She was Marcus's aunt by marriage, the widow of his father's brother, and she had been present at every significant event in his life since he was 11 years old. She had also, for 19 months, been keeping a record. She called Marcus 6 weeks after the letter, not before, because she had known he would need 6 weeks first. She asked him to come for dinner on a Sunday. She said she had something to show him, and she needed him to hear all of it before he said anything. He drove to her house in Columbus on a Sunday afternoon. She made pot roast. They ate. She poured coffee. She reached over and placed a folder on the table between them. "I'm going to tell you what I saw," she said, "and then I'm going to show you what I kept. Let me finish before you say a word." He nodded. She opened the folder. The first section was a timeline she had built from observation, dates, events, names, cross-referenced against things she had heard from Marcus over the same period. Gregory Holt had entered Diane's life in October, not January. Marcus had been the last to know in the room. The restaurant charge in March had not been a first occasion. It had been a pattern that went back 17 weeks. Marcus looked at the page. He looked at the earliest date, October. He had spent October building Routcor's Series A presentation. He had been in the office most evenings. He had come home late, found the house dark, and had been grateful for the quiet. He had not known that the quiet had been arranged. "There's more," Lorraine said. She turned to the second section. While Marcus had been building Routcor, Diane had been building something of her own, though building was not quite the right word for it. She had, over the 14 months prior to the letter, moved $47,000 from the joint household savings account in a series of withdrawals, 9 transactions, amounts between $3,500 and $8,000, each one unremarkable on its own. The account had started at $61,000. It now held $14,000. "She told you those were home improvement expenses," Lorraine said. "I know because you mentioned it to me in February. You said she was handling a bathroom renovation." Marcus was quiet. "There was no renovation," Lorraine said. He looked at the transaction dates. He looked at the amounts. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he picked up his coffee and held it. "Where did it go?" he said. "That's the third section," she said. She turned the page. Gregory Holt's public financial profile had looked stable. $14 million earned across a decade of commercial real estate development in Columbus and Indianapolis. What was not in the public profile was that 2 of his largest projects had been financed on leveraged debt at rates that presumed a market that had since shifted. One project in Indianapolis had stalled entirely. A $9.2 million development that had been halted by a zoning dispute 18 months ago and had not moved since. The other, a mixed-use development in Westerville, was carrying $8 million in contractor debt that had been rolled twice. The $47,000 Diane had moved from their household account had gone, in 3 wire transfers, to a holding LLC co-owned by Gregory Holt. She had used their savings to invest in a man who was already in trouble. She had done it without asking Marcus. She had done it while telling him the money was for bathroom tile. Marcus stood from the table. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. Lorraine's yard. The same yard where he had played as a child. The same oak tree at the back fence that had been there his entire life, unchanged and indifferent. He stood over what he had just been shown, the way he stood over a routing system that had failed, not reading any single error, but looking at the whole sequence, finding where the first wrong turn had cascaded into every wrong turn after it. He could see the full shape of it. 14 months ago, while he had been working towards something real, she had been extracting from what he had built and transferring it, quietly, into the orbit of a man whose foundation was already cracking. She had made a bet against him. She had made it with his own money. He turned back to the table. "All right," he said. "What do you want to do?" Lorraine asked. He looked at the folder. He thought about Rootcore, about the Series B he had closed in February, the 47 carrier clients now on the platform, the acquisition conversation that had begun, quietly, 6 weeks ago, with a strategic buyer he had been talking to for 2 years. "I want to finish what I started," he said. "Then I want it to be on record what she did with that money." He didn't move fast. That was the part she could never have predicted about him, and the part that mattered most. He retained an attorney, a woman named Vivian Osai, 47 years old, family law and asset recovery, Cincinnati, who had a reputation for patience and an instinct for exactly how much documentation was required before a case became irrefutable. She reviewed Lorraine's folder on a Monday morning and called Marcus that afternoon. "This is clean," she said. "The wire transfers to the LLC are documented. The co-ownership is in the public record. She used marital assets for a private investment without consent. That's dissipation. We can recover." "How long?" he said. "If we file quietly and let discovery run its course, 4 to 6 months. Or faster if you want fast." "I don't want fast," he said. "I want complete." She understood. She had the dissolution petition filed within the week, standard and unremarkable, no press, no public record beyond what the court required. Meanwhile, Vivian's forensic accountant spent 6 weeks establishing the full asset picture of the marriage. What had been brought in, what had been withdrawn, what was still recoverable, what Diane had retained in accounts Marcus had not known existed. The figure that came back was $61,400. Total unauthorized withdrawal and diversion from marital assets. Documented to the dollar, Marcus sat with that number for a quiet moment. Then he went back to work. Because Rootcore needed him. He had not told anyone at the company about the divorce. His 6-person leadership team knew something personal was happening. He was quieter at meetings than usual, more deliberate. Though that was a difference only someone who knew him well would have noticed. He had not slowed down. He had not lost a client. He had, in the 5 months since the letter, brought on 11 new carriers and expanded the software's AP integration to support 3 new logistics management systems. The acquisition conversation was no longer a conversation. It was a term sheet. Pinnacle Systems, a publicly traded supply chain technology company with $1 billion in revenue, had submitted a letter of intent in August. The figure in the letter of intent was $400 million. Marcus had read it standing at his desk on a Tuesday morning. He had set it down on top of his keyboard. He had sat down. He had thought about the carrier dispute in Portland that he had worked through on the morning Diane's letter arrived. He had thought about the 6 years of building, The 4-hour nights, the 2 conversations in which she had asked him to wind it down. He had thought about Lorraine's folder, and the Thursday evenings, and the $47,000, and the holding LLC, and the man whose Westerville development was 9 months delinquent. He picked up his phone. He called Vivian. The term sheet came in, he said. She was quiet for a moment. "How does it look?" she said. "Complete," he said. Diane had called twice in the months since the filing. Her voicemails had been measured, careful. The voice of a woman who believed the situation was already settled in the way she had imagined it, and was simply being efficient about the conclusion. In the second voicemail, she had mentioned Gregory briefly, in a way that was designed to signal stability, that things were good, that she was happy, that she hoped they could finalize things amicably. He had not called back. He had had Vivian send the full asset disclosure to Diane's attorney instead. Diane's attorney had called Vivian 2 days after receiving it. Her tone had changed. The next call from Diane's side had a different quality entirely. She thought, her attorney said, that they should discuss the root core situation. Vivian had said there was nothing to discuss. The company was a premarital asset, built on premarital investment. What was to be discussed was the $61,400 in marital asset diversion, and what Diane intended to do about it. Diane had called Marcus directly that evening. He let it go to voicemail. She called again the following morning. He listened to both messages. The first was cautious. The second was no longer cautious in the same way. He could hear the new information in her voice, not just about the $61,400, but about what was behind the term sheet. What the company he had called his little project was now worth. What she had walked away from on a Tuesday in April because she had looked at a man in a 6-year-old Jeep who woke at 5:15 and read contracts and had assumed she knew what she was looking at. He called Vivian. "She's ready to talk," he said. "I know," Vivian said. "Her attorney called this morning." "What does she want?" "She wants to understand the root core number. She'll understand it in discovery." "That's what I told them," Vivian said. "Tuesday at 10. I've scheduled the conference room," he said. "Fine." He ended the call. He sat at his desk for a moment. The term sheet was still there. $400 million, a number that would have been unimaginable on the morning he found the carrier dispute and the letter, and drank the cold coffee and went back to work. It was not unimaginable now. It was simply accurate. Marcus arrived 25 minutes early. He always did. The conference room was on the 10th floor of Vivian's building in downtown Cincinnati. Clean lines, a long glass table, the city visible through the west facing windows in the flat morning light of an October Tuesday. Nothing on the walls. The kind of room where the facts speak without decoration. Vivian was there when he arrived. She arranged her materials with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to know exactly what the next 2 hours would look like. Her forensic accountant, a careful man named Jerome, who had spent 21 years doing exactly this work, placed his documents at the far end of the table without ceremony. Diane arrived at 10:04 with her attorney. She had dressed for the meeting, a dark blazer, her hair precise. She looked at Marcus when she came in, then at the table, then at the documents already laid out. Something in the way she moved had changed from the woman who had written 3 pages and left them in an envelope on his desk. That woman had been certain. This woman was reading the room. She sat across from him. She did not say anything. Vivian opened the session. "There are 2 matters before we discuss any broader settlement." She placed the first document, the joint account records, 5 months of transaction history, the 9 withdrawals laid out in clean rows. Between October and March, $47,000 was withdrawn from the marital savings account and directed to a holding LLC co. owned by Gregory Holt. This is documented and meets the legal standard for dissipation of marital assets. Jerome placed the second document, the wire transfer records, 3 transactions, dates and destinations and dollar amounts, every figure verified. Additionally, Vivian continued. A separate amount of $14,400 was moved from a household equity line of credit to the same destination between February and March. She let that number settle. Total documented diversion, $61,400. Diane's attorney was reading. He had not looked up from the page. Gregory Holt's Holding LLC, Vivian said, filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection in July of this year. The Westerville development and the Indianapolis project have both been surrendered to creditors. The $61,400 transferred from marital assets is unrecoverable. Mr. Cole is seeking full repayment from Diane's share of the marital estate. The room was quiet. Diane looked at the documents. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the documents again. Her expression went through several things, not quickly, but visibly, the way a person works through information that is arriving in the wrong order from the way they had arranged the world. Jerome placed the third document, the Pinnacle Systems Letter of Intent, $400 million, the company name, the date, the signature line. He placed it on the table without a word. Diane looked at it. She had known a number was coming. Her attorney had told her there was a term sheet, had told her it was significant. Knowing a number is coming and seeing it on a page in a room on the 10th floor are two different experiences. Her hands, which had been flat on the table, moved. She put them in her lap. Her attorney said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Marcus stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Jerome's hand and then Vivian's. He picked up the only thing he had brought, a single folder that had served its purpose, and he walked toward the door. He stopped in the doorway. He turned back to Diane. He said it quietly. Not for the room, not for the record. Because it was the true thing and she had earned the right to hear it clearly. You didn't leave a struggling man, he said. You left a man who hadn't finished yet. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The settlement was finalized in December. Diane received her equitable share of the marital estate, reduced by the $61,400 in documented asset diversion. Rootcore was excluded entirely, established as a premarital asset built on premarital capital. She received what the law entitled her to. It was fair. It was also, measured against the term sheet that had been on the table, the smallest fraction of what she had imagined. Gregory Holt's bankruptcy was finalized in February. The Westerville development was acquired by a creditor for $2 million, less than a fifth of its projected value. He was living in a rented apartment in Worthington by spring, working in business development for a commercial brokerage firm. He was carrying the weight of what he had built and lost the way a person carries something they cannot set down. Not dramatically, just constantly. The Pinnacle Systems acquisition closed in March. Marcus did not throw a party. He did not post anything. He told his team at a Tuesday morning meeting, the same meeting they had every Tuesday, and they applauded and he thanked them for 6 years of the kind of work that makes a $400 million acquisition feel like a logical conclusion rather than a miracle. He had 7 employees the year Diane left. He had 31 now, in 3 cities. He answered every call the same day. He gave timelines and hit them. His name was on the product. His name was on the building directory. His name was, in the week after the close, in 4 industry publications and 1 profile in a logistics trade journal that described him as one of the most patient builders in mid-market freight technology. Patient. He had read that word and sat with it. Lorraine came to Columbus for a weekend in April. They had dinner at his apartment, nothing elaborate, the same pot roast she always made, which tasted the same in his kitchen as it did in hers, which was the point. She brought the folder. He told her she could throw it away. She said she was going to keep it. He didn't argue. He had learned not to argue with Lorraine Whitfield about what was worth keeping. After dinner, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and looked at the city through the window for a while. "Your father would have said something understated," she said. Something that landed harder than it should have. Marcus thought about that. What would he have said? She considered. Something like, "You built on solid ground." She didn't know what solid ground felt like. That's not your fault, and it's not really hers. It's just what happens when someone mistakes the early part of a thing for the whole thing. He looked out the window. "Yeah," he said. Something like that. On a morning in May, Marcus stood at the window of his office on the 14th floor of a building in Columbus, a building his company had moved into 3 months ago. The address his name now appeared on in the lobby directory downstairs. The city was going about its business below. Delivery trucks on the avenue. A crew remarking a crosswalk, the ordinary infrastructure of a place that needs its logistics to work, and mostly doesn't think about who made that possible. He had a cup of coffee. Hot this time. He thought about the carrier dispute in Portland. The morning the letter came. The cold coffee and the 3 pages and the envelope he had placed under his keyboard and gone back to work. He had gone back to work. He finished the coffee. He set the cup on the windowsill. He pulled out his phone and checked the morning dispatches. A flag on a route in Memphis, a driver delay in Phoenix, a client question about a new AP integration that his team had already answered while he was looking at the city. His team. 31 people who had bet on the same thing he had and had not been wrong. He put his phone away. He went back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.